Get out, we change the locks. That was the first thing I heard when I stepped onto my own porch that night. My father, Charles Reynolds, stood planted in front of the door like a soldier guarding enemy territory. Beside him, my mother Diane clutched her sweater tightly, her lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line, and at my father's feet sat a suitcase. My suitcase, already packed, zipped and waiting, as if I were nothing more than an unwanted tenant being thrown out on the street. I froze, my car keys still dangling from my hand. The porch light glared down on me, exposing everything. The shock on my face, the sting in my eyes, the tremble in my fingers. Behind them, leaning in the doorway, like he'd already claimed the place was my brother Anthony. Arms folded, smug smile, plastered across his face. He didn't even try to hide his triumph. Finally, Anthony said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "This house has the right owner." My stomach dropped so fast, it felt like the ground had opened beneath me. My house, the 2-story brick home in Denver, I had worked a decade to pay off. Every mortgage payment, every late-night overtime shift, every vacation I skipped to scrape together the money, it had all led to this place, my sanctuary, my future, and now my own family was telling me I didn't belong in it. "Dad, Mom," I stammered, searching their faces for even a shred of warmth of reason. "What are you doing? This is my home." Charles didn't blink. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold. "Hand over your keys, Monica. We changed the locks this morning. It's better this way." Better for who? My pulse pounded in my ears. My mother finally spoke, her voice, quiet, but sharp enough to cut. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You know Anthony is the future of this family. A son carries the name. A daughter moves on." Her words hit harder than the icy air. I glanced past them, desperate to see my familiar home. But what I saw made me stumble back. The lavender scent I always used after cleaning had been wiped away, replaced by something chemical and harsh. A new rug lay across the entryway. A stranger's jacket hung on the rack. My presence, my identity was already being erased. I pressed my purse to my side, feeling the hard edge of the folder, inside copies of the deed, the release of lien, every document proving this house was legally mine. But right now, with my family blocking the door, those papers felt useless. Anthony chuckled, stepping forward, his breath curling in the cold air. "Face it, Monica. You've had your fun pretending, but you're 37, single, childless. What do you need a house like this for? You don't carry the family forward. I do." The words stung like open-handed slaps. I looked at my parents, begging them silently to correct him, to say this wasn't true, that I was just as much their child as Anthony. But they didn't. Their silence was their answer. They had already chosen. My chest tightened. They weren't just throwing me out of a house. They were throwing me out of the family, out of existence itself. The people who had raised me, who were supposed to protect me, had aligned themselves with my brother, the Golden Son, and they were daring me to fight back. I gripped my keys so tightly, the metal dug into my skin, grounding me in the storm of betrayal. My voice finally broke free, raw and shaking, but louder than I thought possible. "You can change the locks, but you can't change the truth. This house is mine." Anthony laughed again, cruel and careless, like he'd already won. "We'll see about that." And with those words, I realized the war for my home and my identity had just begun. Just a week before that night on the porch, my life had felt almost steady. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I had begun to breathe without the weight of debt on my chest. The morning light had poured into my kitchen, bouncing off the clean counters and the framed photos. I had carefully arranged pictures of me at college graduation, snapshots with friends on weekend hikes, even a silly one of me and my best friend, Tiffany Cole, laughing so hard, our faces blurred in the photo. My house smelled like lavender spray and fresh coffee, the scent of a life I had built brick by brick, payment by payment. That Saturday, I had invited my parents, Charles and Diane, and my brother Anthony, over for dinner. I told myself it was time to finally share with them the good news I had been carrying like a secret treasure. After years of scrimping, saving, working overtime, in my job as a financial manager, I had made the last mortgage payment. The house was fully mine, debt-free, a milestone that had cost me sleep, friendships, and nearly my health. I wanted them to know, to see me, to maybe be proud. I cooked their favorite dishes: roast chicken, garlic, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. I even splurged on a bottle of California wine that I normally wouldn't buy for myself. I set the dining room with the good plates, the ones I had inherited from my grandmother, and lit candles along the table. I stood in the glow of the flickering light, waiting, hoping. When the doorbell rang, I rushed to greet them, my heart racing like a child waiting for approval. But the moment they stepped inside, the air shifted. My mother, Diane, sniffed, her eyes glancing over the living room. "You really should hire someone with taste to help decorate, Monica. This place looks serviceable." Anthony smirked, running his hand over the banister. "If this were my house, I'd knock down that wall and make it open concept. Modern families like that." Charles nodded, giving Anthony a proud clap on the back. "That's the kind of vision a man brings, always thinking about the future." I swallowed my disappointment and guided them to the table. Maybe once we ate, once I shared the news, things would be different. Maybe they'd finally see me as more than the daughter who was always fine, always managing, never quite enough. We sat down to dinner. I poured the wine, filled their plates. The candles flickered, casting shadows on the faces of the people who should have been my foundation. When I told them I had paid off the house completely, my voice wavered with pride. "It's official. No more mortgage. This place is mine, free and clear." And for a moment, silence. My chest expanded, waiting for congratulations, for a smile, for my father to lift his glass. Instead, Anthony leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening. "You paid it off. Well, good for you. But let's be real, Monica, you don't really need all this space. Not when you're just one person. A family should have this house." My father's glass clinked as he raised it, not to me, but to Anthony. "To our son Charles," said proudly, "the one who will carry this family name." I forced a smile, the taste of roasted chicken turning bitter in my mouth. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand, her smile thin, patronizing. "Don't take it personally, dear. You've done well enough, but Anthony, he's our future. You understand." Understand. The words burned in my ears. I stared at the flickering candles, my heart aching with the knowledge that my achievement, the biggest milestone of my life, had just been dismissed as nothing. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of garlic and wine, I realized the truth I had been avoiding all my life. In my family, being a daughter would never be enough. The weeks after that dinner felt like living in a slow-motion avalanche. Small insults tumbling down one by one until I was buried under their weight. At first, I tried to brush them off, tell myself I was imagining things, but the pattern was too clear. Every time my parents or my brother stepped into my house, there was another reminder that in their eyes, I was only borrowing space until Anthony claimed it. One Sunday afternoon, Diane stopped by, unannounced. She walked through the front door like she owned it, her perfume clouding the air. She glanced at the sofa I had saved for months to afford running her fingers across the fabric. "This feels cheap," she said with a sniff. "If you had a husband, he would know how to pick quality furniture. Men have a better eye for lasting things." I stood there with a smile plastered on my face, my nails digging into my palms. My mother had always been subtle with her favoritism, but this was no longer subtle. It was a declaration my choices as a woman alone were never going to measure up. Another evening, Charles came over while I was in the middle of working on reports for a client. He stomped across the new rug I had bought, his boots still muddy from the yard. I gasped, reaching for the vacuum, but he waved me off. "Relax, Monica. A rug is just a rug. If Anthony were living here, he wouldn't care about something so small. That's the difference between sons and daughters. Sons think about the big picture." I wanted to shout that I had been thinking about the big picture every single day for 10 years, that paying off a mortgage wasn't small, that maintaining a home wasn't trivial. But the words stuck in my throat as my father's offhand dismissal sliced me open. Anthony's visits were the worst. He treated the house like it was already his inheritance. One night, I found him standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, surveying the cabinets. "If I owned this place," he said casually, "I'd rip out all these counters and put in granite, maybe even stainless steel appliances. A real family kitchen, not this starter home setup." I laughed bitterly. "It's not a starter home, Anthony. It's mine, and I like it the way it is." He smirked, patting my shoulder with mock pity. "You've played house long enough. Don't get too attached." The words echoed long after he left. Played house. As if the blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into every corner of this home were nothing more than a child's game. Even outside my walls, the message carried. At a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard my parents talking to a neighbor, their voices carrying over the crackle of the grill. Diane smiled warmly as she said, "Of course Anthony will settle here soon. This house is perfect for a man ready to start his family. Monica's just keeping it warm." The neighbor's eyes flicked to me pity in her gaze, as if I were an object waiting to be replaced. I smiled through gritted teeth, my burger suddenly tasteless in my mouth. Each slight, each remark, each moment of erasure chipped away at me until even I began to question my own place. Late at night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "This is my house. I earned it. It's mine." I repeated it like a prayer because no one else was going to say it for me. But their voices were louder. "A daughter just leaves. You've had your fun pretending. A son carries the family name." It was gaslighting at its cruelest. They were trying to make me believe that what I had built didn't exist, that I was only a placeholder for the rightful heir, Anthony. And the worst part, they said it with smiles, with pats on the hand, with laughter that dared me to argue. I began to realize these weren't just casual comments. They were laying the groundwork for something bigger, something I hadn't yet seen, but could feel like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. And then one evening, that storm broke wide open. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening, the kind of day when I normally came home and collapsed on the couch, grateful just to have made it through. But that night, the air in the house felt wrong the second I stepped inside. The lights were all on, too bright, almost hostile, and the scent of my lavender spray had been replaced by something heavy and chemical, like air freshener, from a dollar store. My heart sank before I even saw them. They were waiting in the living room, seated like a tribunal. My father, Charles Reynolds, sat stiff in my favorite armchair, the one I used to curl into, with a book on quiet nights. My mother, Diane, perched on the sofa, her hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered, as if rehearsing a role she didn't quite believe in. And Anthony, my brother, lounged across the other chair, like a king on his throne, smirking as if the verdict had already been decided. "Sit down," Monica Charles ordered. His tone was clipped formal, the way he sounded when he lectured me as a child. I stayed standing. "What's going on?" My voice was steady, though inside I was already unraveling. Anthony leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We're not going to dance around it. This house shouldn't be yours alone. It's too much for you, and frankly, you're not fit to keep it. You're 37, no husband, no kids, no future legacy. What you've done here is temporary. It belongs to the family, to me." The words slammed into me like a punch. My eyes darted to my parents, waiting for them to shut him down, to tell him he was out of line. But they didn't. My father nodded, as if Anthony had spoken a profound truth. And my mother sighed, her expression filled with false sympathy. "Anthony's right," Charles said, his voice low, but unyielding. "This house is wasted if it only holds one person. A son," continues the line. "A daughter. Well, you've done fine for yourself, Monica. But it's time to think of what's best for the family name." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My mother reached out her fingers, brushing the edge of my arm, but her words were knives. "Don't fight this, sweetheart. We've already changed the locks. We packed your suitcase. It's better if you just move on." My gaze shot to the corner, and sure enough, there it was, my suitcase, zipped and sitting by the door like an eviction notice. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat shouting the same truth: this was real. I shook my head slowly, unable to take in the betrayal unfolding in front of me. "You can't just throw me out of my own home. I paid for this. Every payment, every late night, every sacrifice. It was me, not Anthony. Me." Anthony stood towering over me, his grin cruel. "You think you did this alone? Without family support, you wouldn't have made it. Dad co-signed the first loan. Mom helped when you lost your job that year. This house is family property. You were just holding it until the rightful owner was ready." My breath caught in my throat. His words twisted half-truths into daggers. Yes, my father had co-signed years ago, but I had refinanced, taken on the burden myself, and paid it all down. Yes, my mother had offered me money during a rough patch, but I had refused. None of it mattered. They had rewritten the story, erased my effort, turned me into nothing more than a placeholder. Charles rose from the armchair, his height casting a shadow over me. "Enough. Leave the keys, take your suitcase, and don't come back until you've accepted what's been decided." The silence that followed was suffocating. My throat burned. My hands clenched around my purse until my knuckles ached. They weren't asking. They were commanding, united against me. I looked at the three of them. My father's steel glare, my mother's patronizing softness, my brother's smug triumph, and felt something inside me snap. The house wasn't just under siege. My very existence in this family was being erased. I grabbed my purse, lifted my chin, and walked out the door, the sound of Anthony's laughter following me into the cold Denver night. The night swallowed me as I walked down the front steps, suitcase wheels thudding against the concrete. The air was freezing, the kind that bites at your skin, and makes every breath feel like glass. But I barely felt it. My chest was tight, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might split in two. Behind me, through the closed door, I could still hear Anthony's laugh, a cruel mocking sound that made my stomach twist. My own parents had stood by and let it happen. No worse, they had helped him. I tossed the suitcase into the back of my car and slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut as if it could block out the betrayal echoing in my ears. For a long moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the porch light that still glared down like a spotlight on my shame. The home I had fought for, sacrificed for, was gone, taken not by strangers, but by the very people who should have celebrated my victory. I turned the key, and the engine growled to life. I drove with no direction, the city lights blurring as tears stung my eyes. Every corner I turned felt unfamiliar, every street foreign, even though I had lived in Denver all my life. The truth was sinking in. I had nowhere to go. My parents had erased me from my own house, and my brother had declared himself the rightful heir. Eventually, I pulled into a gas station on the edge of town, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, harsh and unkind. I sat there, trembling, the cold seeping through my coat, my breath fogging the glass. My phone vibrated in my purse. I almost ignored it, assuming it was Anthony or my mother, ready to deliver another blow. But something in me reached for it anyway. Ms. Reynolds. The voice on the line was crisp, professional. "This is Jennifer, calling from Mountain State Bank. We're just following up on a request we received earlier today." I frowned, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "A request?" "Yes," she said carefully. "We have documentation here requesting the addition of a co-owner on your property deed, an Anthony Reynolds. We just wanted to confirm before proceeding." The blood drained from my face. My grip tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. "Proceeding? What are you talking about? I never authorized that. This is my property. I am the sole owner." There was a pause on the line, the quiet rustle of papers. "That's exactly why we're calling Ms. Reynolds. According to our records, you are indeed the sole owner of the property. The paperwork submitted raised some red flags. It doesn't match the original signatures on file. We're flagging it for fraud investigation." My heart thudded heavy and fast. Relief and rage mixed together like fire and ice. "So you're telling me they tried to forge their way onto my deeds?" "Yes, ma'am," Jennifer replied firmly. "Rest assured, we will not be processing this request. Only you have the authority. You may want to take additional protective steps, but legally, the house belongs to you and you alone." I closed my eyes, the weight of her words crashing over me. Sole owner. It was mine, no matter how loudly Anthony declared it was his, no matter how my parents tried to erase me. The truth was written in black and white, signed and sealed in the very system they couldn't manipulate. A sob broke free, half laughter, half despair. "Thank you," I whispered. My voice shook, but strength sparked inside me like a flame reigniting. I ended the call and stared at my reflection in the windshield. My eyes were swollen, my makeup smudged, but I saw something else beneath the exhaustion determination. They had declared war on me, but I had proof, and now I had a warning. I wasn't just a daughter they could push aside. I was the owner, and I was about to fight like hell to prove it. 2 days later, I drove back to the house. I told myself it was just to grab the rest of my things, the boxes I hadn't touched since moving in. But the truth was uglier. I needed to see if it was real, if they had actually gone through with what the bank had warned me about. When I pulled into the driveway, my heart stopped. The blinds I had picked out last summer, pale linen with tiny embroidered flowers, were gone. In their place hung heavy brown drapes that blocked the light, the kind my parents favored, dark and suffocating. The front porch, where I had planted lavender in clay pots, now held my mother's chrysanthemums, lined up like soldiers. Even from the street, I felt the intrusion. I stepped out of my car, slowly, gravel crunching under my shoes, and stared at the brass numbers nailed above the door. My house, my sanctuary, looked like it belonged to someone else. My keys jangled in my hand, but when I tried the lock, it refused to turn. They hadn't been lying, they had changed it. Through the living room window, I caught a glimpse of Anthony. He was stretched across my sofa, the one I had worked double shifts to afford. His boots were propped on my coffee table. He laughed at something my father said, the sound carrying through the glass like a taunt. Diane fluttered about, placing her china figurines on my shelves, moving my photos into a cardboard box shoved carelessly on the floor. I froze, my throat tightening. It wasn't just that they had taken over my space. They were erasing me piece by piece. The framed photo of me and Tiffany that had hung near the mantel was gone. The quilt my grandmother had given me, always draped across the back of the chair, had vanished. Even the lavender scent I loved had been scrubbed away, replaced by my mother's overpowering rose spray. Rage rose in my chest, hot and bitter, but beneath it was something colder, grief. Watching them occupy my home was like attending my own funeral. Every trace of me was being wiped away, as if I had never lived there at all. I knocked on the window with the flat of my hand. Anthony turned his head, smirk, curling his lips. He didn't get up. He just raised his glass of beer in a mocking toast, as if to say, "Look who's outside now." My father finally opened the door, his face hard as stone. "Why are you here, Monica?" "Why am I here?" My voice cracked. "This is my house. You don't get to just move in and pretend I don't exist. It stopped being yours the day you walked out," he said flatly. "You made your choice. Now let it go. We're building something for the family here, and you—" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You've had your turn." Behind him, my mother called out, "Don't drag this out, Monica. It'll only make things harder." She didn't even look at me as she placed another figurine on the shelf where my college diploma used to hang. Anthony leaned against the doorframe, grinning. "Go back to whatever life you think you have. This house already looks better without you." The words hit harder than I expected. My eyes burned, but I refused to let them see me cry. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hit record, and held it up. "Say that again," I demanded. Anthony's grin faltered for just a second before he laughed it off. "Always dramatic. You really think anyone's going to believe you over us?" But I didn't need them to believe me, not yet. What mattered was that the camera caught his words, his smug face, the truth of what they were doing. I turned on my heel and walked back to my car, their voices still drifting out behind me, muffled but unmistakable. They were planning more changes, painting the walls, moving in Anthony's things, throwing out what was left of mine. As I gripped the steering wheel, the tears finally fell. It wasn't just theft, it was erasure. They wanted to rewrite history so thoroughly that in a year, no one would even remember that Monica Reynolds had ever lived in that house. But evidence doesn't blink. And now I had the first piece. The drive to Tiffany's apartment felt endless. My hands were still trembling on the steering wheel. The image of Anthony lounging on my couch, replaying in my mind like a loop I couldn't escape. By the time I knocked on her door, my throat ached from holding back sobs. She opened it in her scrubs, hair pulled back, exhaustion in her eyes from another 12-hour hospital shift. But the moment she saw me, her face shifted from weary to fierce. "Monica," she whispered, pulling me inside before I could speak. What happened? I didn't have to explain right away. She saw the suitcase still clutched in my hand, the redness of my eyes, the way I could barely stand upright. I sank into her couch and let the words spill out, how they'd changed the locks, how my parents had erased every trace of me, how Anthony raised his glass at me, like he was toasting my disappearance. Tiffany sat beside me, listening in silence, one hand gripping mine with steady strength. "They can't do this to you," she said, finally, her voice low, uncertain. "You paid for that house. You fought for it. They don't get to just walk in and steal it because they think you're disposable." Her certainty gave me a breath of air I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time since that Thursday night, I didn't feel completely alone. I pulled out my phone, replaying the short video clip I had recorded. Anthony's mocking voice filled the room. "Go back to whatever life you think you have. This house already looks better without you." Tiffany's jaw tightened. "That's not just arrogance, that's evidence." We spent the next hour combing through what I already had: mortgage statements, the refinance documents, the deed listing me as sole owner, all tucked away in a file folder I had carried from the glove compartment. Tiffany insisted we make copies, scan everything into her laptop, and back it up on a drive. If they're willing to forge papers at the bank, she warned, they're willing to destroy your originals if they get their hands on them. Her words chilled me, but they rang true. This wasn't just a family spat anymore. It was an orchestrated erasure, and Anthony wasn't playing alone. My parents were enabling every move. By midnight, Tiffany had called someone she trusted. "There's only one person I know who can handle this," she said, pressing the phone into my hand. "Sandra Blake, family property law, 25 years in Denver. She doesn't scare easy." The next morning, I walked into Sandra's office. It smelled faintly of leather and coffee, the walls lined with law books that looked as immovable as mountains. She greeted me with a firm handshake, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Tiffany tells me you're in a bind," Sandra said, motioning for me to sit. I laid out everything: the lock change, the suitcase, waiting by the door, the comments about being just a placeholder, the bank's call about the forged co-owner request, and finally, the invasion I had witnessed with my own eyes. Sandra took notes in a neat, precise script, occasionally raising her brows, but never interrupting. When I finished my voice raw, she set her pen down. "First thing you need to understand, Monica, is that what they're doing isn't just morally wrong. It's illegal. Forgery, fraud, unlawful eviction, your brother and your parents are walking into a minefield." My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something close to hope. "So I can fight this?" "You not only can," Sandra replied, "you must. And you already have a good start." She tapped the file folder I'd slid across her desk. "This deed proves ownership. The voicemail from the bank confirms attempted fraud. That video clip of your brother speaking on record," she smiled thinly, "is the cherry on top. What we'll need next are witness statements, timestamps, and a clear record of their attempts to occupy the property. Build the evidence, and the law will back you." For the first time in days, I felt solid ground beneath me. My family had declared war, but now I had an ally with armor. As I left Sandra's office, Tiffany squeezed my shoulder. "They tried to erase you," she said, but they just wrote their own confession instead. I nodded, gripping the folder against my chest. Evidence never blinks, and mine was only beginning to grow. A week later, Tiffany texted me 3 words that made my blood run cold. They're celebrating. Attached was a photo taken by one of her coworkers who lived down the block from my house. The image showed my driveway, filled with cars, balloons tied to the mailbox, and the porch lights blazing like it was Christmas. Through the window, you could see people gathered, glasses, raised, laughter spilling into the night. My house had become the backdrop for a party I wasn't even invited to. I felt sick. Every chair, every rug, every wall in that house had been paid for by my overtime hours, my careful budgeting, my sacrifices. And now, Anthony was parading it as though it had always been his. "They're calling it a housewarming," Tiffany explained when I met her outside. "Anthony's bragging that he's finally settling in. Your parents are playing along like you never existed. Neighbors are whispering Monica. People think you just left." The words stung worse than any insult Anthony had ever thrown at me. It wasn't enough that they had invaded my space. They were rewriting the narrative, selling the lie that I had simply walked away, handing him the keys with a smile. I stood on the sidewalk across from my house, my fists clenched, the cool Denver night air biting my skin. Music thumped through the wall's base, rattling the windows I had once scrubbed clean every spring. Cars lined the street, and I spotted familiar faces. Cousins, old family friends, even our pastor, walking up the front steps, laughing as Anthony greeted them at my door. It wasn't just a party. It was a public humiliation, staged to cement the lie. If enough people toasted to Anthony as the new master of the house, then the story would harden like concrete. Monica never mattered. Monica never owned anything. Tiffany touched my arm. "You don't have to do this," she murmured. Sandra said to keep building evidence quietly. But she hesitated, her eyes meeting mine. "If you want to make a statement, now is the time." Her words lit a fire inside me. Evidence was important, yes, but silence was what my family thrived on. They counted on me to bow my head, walk away, and let them spin the story unchallenged. If I didn't push back now, the erasure would be complete. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed the wrinkles from my jacket, and crossed the street. My heels clicked against the pavement, sharp and deliberate. Conversations faltered as I stepped onto the porch, and when Anthony opened the door to greet another guest, his grin froze. "Well, look who decided to show up," he drawled, voice dripping with mockery. "Didn't think you'd want to come back after walking out." I didn't flinch. I lifted my phone, high-pressing record. My voice was calm, cutting through the murmurs. "Funny, Anthony. You're throwing a party in a house you don't own." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered, "What's she talking about?" Anthony chuckled, but the sound was tight. "Ignore her, everyone. My sister's just confused. Stress, you know, she's been having trouble for years." I turned slowly, addressing the room full of relatives and neighbors. "Trouble. Let me clarify. My name is Monica Reynolds. I paid off this house myself. My name is the only one on the deed, and I have the documents, the bank statements, and the witnesses to prove it. What you're attending tonight isn't a housewarming. It's a fraud in progress." Gasps rippled through the guests. My mother appeared from the kitchen, her face pale but composed. "Monica," she hissed under her breath, "don't do this. You'll embarrass the family." "The family embarrassed itself," I shot back. "You tried to erase me, but evidence doesn't blink. And everyone here is now a witness to your lies." For a long, tense moment, silence reigned. Anthony's jaw worked his face red, but he couldn't summon the same smugness as before. Too many eyes were on him now. Too many whispers, spreading like wildfire. I lowered my phone, my hands steady. "This isn't over," I said, clearly for everyone to hear. "And when the truth comes out in court, you'll wish humiliation was the only consequence you faced." With that, I turned and walked out, Tiffany at my side. Behind me, the noise of the party didn't return. It fractured into uneasy murmurs, a gathering unraveling at the seams. Public humiliation was their weapon of choice. Tonight, I'd turned it back on them. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, a mix of solemnity and dust that clung to the air. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Sandra Blake, my lawyer, while Tiffany squeezed my shoulder from the gallery. My palms sweated against the smooth grain of the table, but my back was straight. This was the place where lies ended and records spoke louder than blood ties. Across the aisle, Anthony lounged in his chair like it was all a joke. He wore a navy suit too big for him, his smirk firmly in place. My parents sat behind him, Diane's pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights, Charles whispering encouragement into Anthony's ear, as if this were just another family dinner argument. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Judge Martinez entered, his robes flowing as he took his seat. His expression was impassive, but the sharpness in his eyes warned against games. We all sat, and the trial began. Sandra rose first. "Your Honor, this case is simple. My client, Monica Reynolds, is the sole legal owner of the property in dispute. She purchased the home, paid the mortgage in full, and holds clear title. The defendants, her brother and parents, attempted to fraudulently insert his name on the deed, illegally changed the locks, and occupied the house while forcibly excluding my client. She placed a thick binder on the bench. Here is the deed, the mortgage statements, the fraud alert issued by Mountain State Bank, and video evidence of Anthony Reynolds admitting he considers the property his despite having no legal claim." Judge Martinez nodded, flipping through the binder briefly. Defense, Anthony's attorney, a slick man with a sharp tie, stood. "Your Honor, this is a family matter blown out of proportion. My client, Anthony Reynolds, is the eldest son, the rightful heir to the family home. It was always understood, though not in writing, that he would inherit it. My client and his parents simply took steps to preserve what was theirs by tradition." The judge leaned forward. His voice was calm, but each word landed like a gavel. "Counselor, tradition does not override property law." Anthony shifted uncomfortably, but his lawyer pressed on. "There is also reason to question Ms. Reynolds' stability. Family members have expressed concern that her judgment is compromised and that her actions are erratic." "Objection," Sandra snapped, rising to her feet. "Baseless slander, irrelevant to the legal facts." "Sustained," Judge Martinez said firmly. "This court is interested in evidence, not character assassination. Proceed carefully." Sandra stood again. "Your Honor, I'd like to play an audio recording provided by Mountain State Bank." She pressed a button, and the courtroom filled with the clipped voice of the bank officer. "We received a forged request to add Anthony Reynolds as co-owner on the deed. It did not match the signature on file, and the request has been flagged as fraudulent." Whispers rippled through the gallery. Judge Martinez's eyes darkened. Forgery is a serious matter. Anthony's smirk faltered. His mother leaned forward as if to shush him, but it was too late. Sandra cued the second piece of evidence, the video clip I had recorded on my phone. Anthony's face filled the screen, his voice echoing in the chamber. Go back to whatever life you think you have. This house already looks better without you." The silence afterward was suffocating. Even my father's shoulders slumped. Sandra's voice was steady. "Your Honor, the defendants attempted to erase my client, not just from her home, but from her own life. Yet the deed, the bank records, and their own words prove otherwise. We request immediate restitution of property damages for unlawful eviction and a fraud investigation." Judge Martinez leaned back, hands folded. His gaze swept from me to Anthony, then to my parents. "The evidence is clear. Monica Reynolds is the sole legal owner. Anthony Reynolds, you attempted fraud, and you unlawfully occupied the property. Charles and Diane Reynolds, you aided in this unlawful eviction. Restitution is granted to the plaintiff. The Sheriff's Department will oversee the immediate removal of the defendants from the property." He paused, his voice lowering but growing sharper. "Let this be clear. Family loyalty is not a defense against the law. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff." The gavel struck. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. My breath caught, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the crushing weight lift from my chest. I wasn't erased. I was recognized, validated, and victorious. Anthony slammed his hand against the table. His mask of confidence shattered. My mother covered her face with trembling fingers, while my father stared straight ahead as if the ground itself had betrayed him. But Tiffany's hand was warm on my shoulder. Sandra's eyes, proud as steel, and the truth stood like a fortress around me. Evidence never blinks, and in that courtroom, it had spoken louder than any lie. The ruling didn't end at the courthouse doors. It spilled into the streets, into whispers at church, into the aisles of the grocery store. By the time I returned to my house with a sheriff's deputy walking beside me, the story had already traveled faster than I could drive. Anthony stood on the lawn as deputies carried his boxes out one by one. His face was crimson, his voice loud enough for the whole block. "This isn't over, Monica. You'll regret embarrassing us like this." But the neighbors didn't nod in sympathy. They looked away, shaking their heads. Mrs. Clark, from next door, muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Shameful, treating your sister like that after she worked so hard." I stepped past him, my keys, once again, fitting smoothly into the lock. The door swung open to my home, though scarred drapes I hadn't chosen. Carpet stained from careless boots, my photographs shoved into boxes as though I were a stranger. Still, it was mine again. Within days, word spread. The pastor, who had attended the so-called housewarming, sent me a handwritten note. "I apologize for believing the lie. You deserved better." Old friends called voices, hushed with guilt, confessing they had thought I'd abandoned the house. Now they knew the truth. For Anthony, the fallout was merciless. His employer heard about the forgery through the grapevine. By Friday, he was suspended, pending an internal review. Fraud wasn't just a family issue. It was a stain that followed him everywhere. Charles and Diane didn't escape unscathed. Their reputation as pillars of tradition in the community cracked. At Sunday service, people whispered instead of greeting them. Invitations dried up. Diane stopped wearing her pearls. Charles walked with his head lowered, his booming voice quieted to a mumble. Tiffany kept me updated with everything the community said. "They're not just ashamed," she told me one evening over coffee. "They're being treated like outcasts. People are realizing they enabled Anthony's lies. And for once, the story isn't on their terms, it's on yours." Still, the victory was bittersweet. Every corner of the house reminded me of what they had tried to erase. Sometimes at night, I caught the faint scent of my mother's rose spray, lingering in the curtains, and anger surged fresh. But then, I'd open the folder Sandra had given me. The deed, the bank letter, the court order, stamped in black ink, and the paper steadied me. Justice hadn't only restored my home, it had exposed the truth in daylight, where no amount of gossip could cover it. Yet Anthony couldn't let go. He tried to post on social media, painting me as an ungrateful sister who turned on her family. Screenshots reached me quickly, and Tiffany only laughed. People aren't buying it anymore. He looks desperate. The more he talks, the worse he looks. And she was right. Every comment beneath his posts echoed the same refrain. The court decided. Monica owns the house. Stop embarrassing yourself. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one defending myself. The truth defended me. One afternoon, as I raked leaves in the yard, a group of neighborhood kids rode by on their bikes. One of them called out, "Miss Reynolds, glad you're back." My throat tightened, tears pricking my eyes. To them, I wasn't erased. I was still here. Inside, Tiffany helped me unpack the last of my rescued boxes. She held up the framed photo of us from college, smiling wide. "This belongs back on the mantel," she said, setting it carefully where it had always sat. The house felt whole again, even if scar tissue lingered. My family's betrayal had been loud, public, humiliating, but so was their fall. And though the whispers still stung, each one carried a reminder they hadn't erased me. They had erased themselves. I stood by the window that night, watching the street where so much had been taken from me, then given back. For the first time in months, I let out a long, steady breath. The war they started was over, and I was still standing. The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon, tucked among bills and grocery flyers. The handwriting on the envelope made my stomach twist. It was my mother's. For a moment, I thought about dropping it straight into the trash, but curiosity won. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table I had eaten countless family meals at, and unfolded the pages. The words were carefully chosen, neat loops of ink that smelled of Diane's perfume. "Monica, we never intended for things to go this far. Families make mistakes. We only wanted to protect tradition, to keep the house in the family line. Your father regrets the way things happened. Anthony regrets the stress it caused. We hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us and move on." There was no true apology, only excuses wrapped in sentiment. They wanted forgiveness without accountability, reconciliation without truth. My chest tightened, anger simmering just beneath the surface. I handed the letter to Tiffany that evening. She read it twice, her eyebrows climbing higher each time. "They're not sorry," she said flatly. "They're sorry they got caught. There's a difference." She was right. Sandra agreed when I showed it to her the next morning. "They're testing your boundaries," she said. "If you let this pass without a response, they'll rewrite the story again. The forgiveness they're asking for isn't about healing, it's about control." I thought about it long into the night. Forgiveness wasn't a word I threw around lightly. And in truth, I didn't hate my parents. Part of me still longed for their approval, still remembered nights of laughter before favoritism poisoned everything. But love without respect is just a leash. So I sat down and wrote my own letter. "Mom, Dad, I received your message. I have thought carefully about what forgiveness would mean. I am open to reconciliation, but only under clear conditions. First, you must publicly acknowledge what happened, that Anthony forged documents, that you changed the locks, that you stood against me in court. Second, you must apologize without excuses, not only to me, but also to the community you misled. Third, you must respect that my home finances and life are mine alone. No more attempts to interfere, no more schemes, no more pretending I don't exist. If you cannot meet these conditions, then forgiveness is not possible. I will not allow myself to be erased again. I read it aloud to Tiffany before sealing it. My hands shook, but there was steel in my voice. That she said with a smile isn't just forgiveness. That's freedom. I mailed the letter the next morning. Weeks passed. There was no reply. I learned later, through a cousin, that my parents had shown my letter to relatives, calling it cold and disrespectful. But others disagreed. For once, people saw the truth laid bare. Anthony never reached out. His silence was an answer in itself. And so the boundary held. In the quiet of my reclaimed home, I realized forgiveness wasn't about handing back power to those who hurt me. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying this far, no further. Whether or not they accepted those conditions, I had spoken my truth. The weight that had once crushed my chest felt lighter. Not gone. Pain, like that, doesn't vanish, but lighter because it was no longer mine to carry. As autumn winds rattled the windows, I stood in the living room, my photos back on the walls, my laughter echoing with Tiffany's as we shared wine on the couch. This house had been nearly stolen, but it was still mine. And so was the life I was building within it. I had set my boundaries. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would be on my terms, not theirs. Winter melted into spring, and with it, the last traces of my family's shadow loosened from the corners of my life. The legal battles were done. The whispers had quieted. My house, once filled with echoes of betrayal, was now filled with the warmth of voices I chose to let in. On Sunday afternoons, Tiffany often came over with her 2 kids. They spread their homework across my dining table, laughing between scribbles of math problems, while Tiffany and I cooked together. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the air instead of the cloying rose spray my mother had once insisted on. This wasn't the home they had tried to erase. It was something better, something honest. Sandra visited occasionally, too, not as my lawyer anymore, but as a friend. She brought stories from her courtroom battles, sometimes grim, sometimes triumphant, each one a reminder that justice was never just abstract. It was built case by case, truth by truth. And I had begun giving back. The betrayal I endured left scars, yes, but it also gave me perspective. I started volunteering at a local support group for people fighting family exploitation parents, cutting children out of wills, siblings, manipulating aging relatives, spouses, hiding assets. Each story carried echoes of my own. I listened, shared, and slowly realized I wasn't alone. None of us were. One evening after group, a woman named Evelyn, silver-haired and trembling, clutched my hand. "They said I was crazy," she whispered. "But hearing your story, it makes me feel sane again." Her words burrowed into my chest. I went home that night and wrote the name for the nonprofit I would eventually file paperwork for Quiet Strength. A place where evidence mattered, where voices couldn't be erased by louder ones, where people like me could rebuild without shame. Meanwhile, my parents and Anthony drifted further into isolation. I heard through the grapevine that Anthony lost his job permanently. Charles and Diane rarely left their house. Once I saw them at the grocery store. My mother's eyes darted away. My father's shoulders hunched as if weighed down by something heavier than groceries. I felt no joy in their collapse, only a distant sadness. But I didn't approach. My conditions for forgiveness still stood, and they had chosen silence over truth. Some nights, I still felt the ache. I'd wake from dreams where I was pounding on a locked door, begging to be let in. But then I'd open my eyes, see the familiar ceiling of my own bedroom, and breathe deeply. I wasn't outside anymore. I was home. On the first anniversary of winning my case, Tiffany and Sandra insisted on a celebration. We sat on the back porch with candles flickering in jars, the night sky spread wide above us. Tiffany raised a glass. To Monica, she said, her voice thick with pride, for proving that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you choose who to let in. We clinked glasses, laughter rising into the air. For once, my heart didn't feel tight. It felt expansive, full. I realized then that family isn't defined by bloodlines or traditions written in invisible ink. Family is the people who respect your boundaries, who show up when others vanish, who tell the truth when lies are easier. The scars of betrayal would always be part of me, but they no longer defined me. What defined me was the quiet strength I had built, the freedom I had claimed, and the home I had refused to surrender. So if you've ever been told you don't belong in your own story, if someone has tried to erase you, remember this evidence never blinks, and neither does your worth. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to family to protect what was rightfully yours? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found power in my journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because sometimes the greatest justice isn't just winning back what was stolen. It's learning you never needed their permission to exist in the first place.